How does the son of a Buddhist teenage single mother growing up in South Central Los Angeles become one of the most compelling conservative Christian voices in the world today? Dr. Voddie Baucham is a prolific author, pastor, and speaker who takes an academic and analytical approach to dismantling many of our culture's worst ideas, from wokeism and critical race theory to the pro-choice movement and trans ideology. Dr. Voddie Baucham, it's an honor to welcome you to Maybe God Podcast.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Well, thank you. It's great to have you. We spent the morning together at the Story Church where you preached a couple of times. How are you feeling?
Feeling good, man.
Good.
Warmed up.
So, yeah, I bet. I mean, it's been a long day already, and I'm just grateful for the time you're willing to give us so that everybody can get to know you. I mean, I've been a fanboy for some time now, admittedly. Not everybody might know you and your work as well as I do. Just tell us a little bit about your upbringing, like the early days of Voddie Baucham growing up in L.A. and what that was like.
Well, I was an only child. I have a sister who is 14 years younger, so I was, raised as an only child. And then I have a brother who's 20 years younger.
Wow.
Yes, and so, it was very interesting. It was just me and my mom, for the most part. And I grew up in a time when Los Angeles wasn't the safest place. not that it is now, but everybody's heard about the Crips and the Bloods and the crack wars and all that other stuff. And when I got old enough to find a little trouble, my mother shipped me out, and I went and spent a year and a half living with her oldest brother, my uncle, who was a retired drill instructor in the Marine Corps.
How old were you?
I was about 12. I was about 11 or 12, and it was life altering.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was life altering. It was great.
So for your mom to send you off,
well, she moved. We moved together.
She came with you.
Yeah, we left.
Okay,
we left.
You must have been in some serious trouble or potential trouble.
It was just it was a rough place to grow up. It was a rough place to raise a son as a single mother. And
what was so eye-opening about having this man in your life?
That there was a man in the house, right? I didn't have that. I didn't know that. I didn't see that. I've often told the story of these two brothers. We lived in this big housing project, and in the middle of it, there was this long field. And I don't know. I mean, as a boy, it seemed like definitely had to be a whole football field. As I was older, I went back, and I'm like, no, not quite. But it was this long field, and but it screamed football field. Yeah. And so we play football, and these two boys came and played with us. And I remember them for two reasons. Number one, because they're from Ann Arbor, Michigan. And we thought they said Antarctica.
Oh.
And we were like, we didn't know there were people there, let alone black people.
Right.
And they were like, no, Ann Arbor. Almost a skull, but not quite.
Right.
And two, I remember that after the game, we all kind of found ourselves found our way back to their apartment. And I wouldn't have said it then, but now I'll say what was intriguing was they had their father lived with them. And none of our fathers lived with us. We didn't know people whose father lived with them.
Wow.
So, living with my uncle and having him there, in the house, that in and of itself was unique and powerful. Then the fact that this guy had done 22 years in the Marine Corps and 2 tours in Vietnam, and he had worked with canines, and he had done scuba diving and all this kind of stuff, and I was like living with G.I. Joe.
Yeah,
he taught me how to hunt and fish and shoot and everything else, and he taught me how to train dogs.
Wow,
which was it was unbelievable for a city boy like me to be in an environment and a situation like that. It really, my world was just turned upside down.
Right. Yeah. How did you change? How did your character change during that time? How were you different coming out of that than you were going in?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I know that I know that I was more respectful.
Yeah.
I know that I was more disciplined. You know, I know that those things, you know, became more significant parts of my life.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, looking back on it, I guess I also had a different perspective, a different orientation, something different to think about, right?
Yeah.
I saw marriage, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I know now. I mean, your life has become what it is, and you've become who you are. And one of your, in my opinion, most powerful sort of talks or things to talk about that I hear you address a lot is fatherhood. And hearing that, it makes it even more interesting to me to hear your perspective.
Yeah.
Because you experienced growing up without a father,
Yeah.
and then suddenly you experienced a glimpse of what it's like
Yeah.
to have a father. So having seen both sides of it and been affected by both sides of it, you have a pretty unique perspective.
You know, when it really hit me was when our daughter was born, our first child was born. And I remember she was right here in Houston. You know, she was born here in Houston. And I was a student at Rice University, and it was my junior year. And Bridget and I got married the summer between my sophomore and junior year.
Yeah.
We had our first baby in 10 months. So here comes Jasmine. And I remember holding her and just weeping.
Yeah.
And what it wasn't just, oh, I'm overjoyed that I have a baby girl. It was just all of a sudden, when I held her, I thought, there's nothing in this world that could compel me to abandon this girl. And immediately after that, I thought, why would my father have abandoned me?
Wow.
Like, how could that happen?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I felt that loss in a very deep emotional way.
Yeah.
Just from being in that moment, you know?
I'm sure.
And having that weight, you know, the weight of a father saying, man, this is my baby.
Right.
I've got a job. I've got a duty. I've got a responsibility. Up until that point, I really didn't have any idea of how impactful growing up without my father had been.
It's interesting. I can only imagine at first the feelings probably must have been some like just incredulity or like, how could he, maybe resentment.
Yeah.
But over time, I feel like I could imagine those feelings shifting more to like pity for him.
Yeah.
Because he missed out.
Yeah. Big time.
Yeah.
And over the years, and, you know, later on, my father, the Lord gave me a relationship with my father. And, which was wonderful. My father came to faith. My mother came to faith within 6 months to a year after I did. My father, a little later on. And the Lord gave me the privilege of really discipling my father.
Wow.
When he came to faith.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And we grew incredibly close. My father, my father was a big man, larger than me. Had a big personality. He was the kind of guy, you know, when he walked into a room, space reorganized itself around him. You know, people just loved to be around him.
Yeah.
You know, I see a lot of that, you know, in myself as well. And he was a professional football player at one point. And then after all that was over, he battled with addiction. And for many years, you know, that was his struggle. And then the Lord brought him out of it, and the Lord saved him. And it was like God, you know, gave him back, you know.
Wow.
And it was great to have that opportunity and to be able to disciple him. And then after about 6 months that the Lord gave us of just this wonderful, incredible relationship, the Lord took him. And back in 2006, he was 55 years old. And
wow.
And just suddenly was gone.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful for that season that we had.
How different it could have been without that.
Yeah.
Wow. What a blessing that was to have that opportunity to disciple him and walk him to the Lord and get to know him some before he was gone. Wow. I didn't know that about your story, and I feel like I've followed you as close as anybody can from a distance.
It's not something I really have talked about, but
it adds more layers to my appreciation for your witness about fatherhood and your clarity about the problem, the crisis really, of father absence in our culture, in the West, in the world probably, but particularly in the West. And you've talked about, the numbers being what they are in the African-American community, and everybody wants to blame, racism or inequalities on it. And so much of it goes back to fatherlessness. And it's not just those the fathers should be taken care of who suffer. It's the fathers who are not being fathers that suffer too, because as you say, that's what we're made for.
Yeah.
That's how God designs us.
Absolutely.
There's 4 things, 4 P words.
Yeah.
I'm going to butcher it. So
you got it. Come on.
All right. So protector, provider. I got it. Protector, provider, prophet, and priest.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit so everybody hears it.
Yeah. And you just think about it this way. Think about prophet, priest, and king, right? These are Christ's offices. And I've had, funny as I say that, there'll always be somebody out there, some feminist out there, who's like, how dare you? You're talking about men, and they're the Jesus,
kingdom, not the kingdom.
They're the Jesus, and I was like, no. Ephesians 5. That's the role that we play. We love our wives like Christ loved the church. Christ, that prophet, priest, and king. And as a prophet, represents God before his people. A priest represents his people before God. And put those two together, that's the spiritual leader, right? The one who's the intercessor and the one who is the discipler, right? Yeah. And the provider, right? He sees that his people have all that they need in order to survive and to thrive. And then the protector puts himself between his people and anything that would do them harm.
Right.
And in a nutshell, that's what we're called to do and to be as men and as fathers. Now, if that's the case, then it's not hard to think about the harm that can be done and that is done when the one who's designed to be the prophet, priest, provider, and protector is absent or derelict in his duties.
Right.
And we have a good God, and he is a father to the fatherless, but we'd be naive to think that just doesn't matter.
Right.
And that absence would be inconsequential.
Sure.
And I think the evidence is overwhelming. You know?
And I've heard you say also it's bad for the guys that don't step up, because men are not made to live for ourselves.
No.
And that's the alternative to living for others, wives, children, neighbors, city, whatever we're called to live and serve selflessly and give our lives away for the sake of others. That's in our DNA. It's God-given. Yeah. And when we don't, what happens? Well, we've seen it in our culture, right? So culture tried to cancel masculinity. I'm oversimplifying, but the feminist movements and all of that tried to have their way with masculinity and just brand it as toxic. And then you had this toxic form of masculinity introduced, in my opinion, by the likes of, Andrew Tate and those guys who present a new form of masculinity that sounds good to men's ears because it's adjacent to our true nature, but it's a bastardized version. It undersells it, really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I was thinking about that when you said you've got these men who are designed for something, but they're not living that way. Isn't it interesting that so many of them spend countless hours by themselves or with a group of other guys playing video games wherein they are fighting battles.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Because it's in them, right? So they find artificial ways to go and be a hero.
Right.
Artificial ways to go and stand in the gap. Artificial ways to go and stand against evil.
Yeah.
Because they're not doing it in the authentic way that God created them to do it.
And the longer it goes on, I think the deeper the despair
Yeah.
becomes. And, I don't know what the numbers are, but anecdotally, it just seems like depression, anxiety, and suicide among young men
Yeah.
is and has been getting worse and worse.
Yeah. Well, and then young couples, because, you have this war on men, this war on masculinity.
Yeah.
You have men, not growing up, not wanting to grow up and not being asked to grow up. You have them being told that being masculine, being a man, being a patriarch, right? The patriarchy, that's evil. And then all of a sudden, they do decide to get married, and now they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Right? Because if I step up and lead, am I then being the evil patriarchy?
Patriarchal, yeah.
If I don't step up and lead, my wife, who was raised as a feminist, has in her heart a desire for a man who's not passive, a desire for a man who leads, but there's a war within her because of that contradiction.
Yeah.
And then we bring children into it. What are we supposed to do now? Right. And now we have this, this permissive parenting and all this other stuff.
Gentle parenting.
Yeah, this gentle parenting where everybody's moving away from authority, And so we have this organization, that is the foundation upon which society is built, that has particular duties and particular roles and particular structures, and everybody in it is warring against the role that they've been created to play.
Yeah.
And it's wreaking havoc.
Yeah. And people say it's what they want, but nobody's really happy with this.
Nobody's happy.
Yeah.
Kids are not happy. Mama's not happy. Daddy's not happy. No, nobody's happy.
Everybody knows something's wrong.
Everybody knows something's wrong.
Yeah.
And everybody who's looking in on it knows something's wrong.
Right.
Yeah. I was at the airport the other day, and there were some gentle parents, and everybody in the airport is looking like, do something. This is not okay.
Right.
And the parents are embarrassed, but they're committed to the facade, right? And they're saying the stuff, and they're doing the stuff, and everybody around them is tiptoeing around the issue as well, because we know that, this is kind of how it's supposed to be done now. And it just, everybody knows.
Yeah.
But nobody says.
Yeah. Well, thank God for men like your uncle, who stepped up when, he didn't have to, I suppose, and showed you what a man really looks like and modeled that for you at a critical point in your life. So we've talked so far about growing up in LA, son of a Buddhist mother.
Yeah.
Is that, was she practicing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we talked about, this transformation in your early teen years and how that affected you. But we haven't talked about Jesus yet, when he came into your life.
Yeah.
When was that?
Yeah, so my first year at university. And so I didn't grow up around, Christianity. I didn't grow up around the gospel. And when I was coming out of high school, I was a highly recruited college athlete. And, I had decided early on that because I had, a scholarship coming my way, I wanted to make the most of it, And so I didn't necessarily just want to go to a football school. I just, I wanted the best education money could buy. So my first 3 visits were to Rice, West Point, and the Air Force Academy.
Dang.
And early on, and I made one other visit. You get 5. I only took 4. I made one other visit. I went to New Mexico State University because their strength coach, this guy named Gil Reyes, was legendary. Mm-hmm. And he came on a recruiting visit. The head coach and Coach Reyes came on the recruiting visit to visit me in high school. And this guy, was in several Chuck Norris movies. He's a martial artist. Their strength program was nationally recognized at this, relatively small school. So I was a fanboy of Gil Reyes. So I went there to visit as well. But I made a decision to go to the Air Force Academy. And my uncle talked me out of it.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, my uncle talked me out of it.
Huh.
My uncle, who I'd lived with, and who was my hero, he called and we talked on the phone, and back then they weren't letting guys out of their 4-year commitment, right? It didn't matter if you had NFL talent. Roger Staubach had to go to the Navy.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that.
I've forgotten about it too.
He had to go to the Navy, man.
Yeah.
And then he came back after the Navy. And so he said, listen, nobody's prouder than me. But if you are thinking about, playing football beyond this, I'd hate to see you not be able to do it.
Sure.
And so coming from him, that was weighty,
Yeah.
He said, you're 17 years old. You just told Uncle Sam he can have you till you're 28.
Wow.
And so, and he said, if you go, you play ball, and you don't end up playing professional football, go get a commission. You'll still get a commission. You can still go serve, And so anyway, after this conversation, I decided that wasn't where I was going to go. Well, by this time, it's too late. There's National Signing Day is already, it comes and it goes, and everybody's made their scholarship commitments and all this sort of stuff. And so I didn't have anywhere to go.
Yeah.
Except New Mexico State.
Wow.
So I went to New Mexico State. And it was crazy. Even when I got there, other guys on the team were like, how'd you end up here? Coach Reyes left that year. He was gone to UNLV. So I was never on the campus with him. He was never my strength coach.
Wow.
And I'm like, what in the world is going on? But one day, a guy named Steve Morgan walks into the locker room and shares the gospel with me. And, in 5 minutes, he realizes I don't know Jesus from the man in the moon.
Yeah.
And came back every day for 2.5, 3 weeks and answered all my questions. And that's how I came to know the Lord.
Wow.
I was there for that one semester.
Yeah. I thought you went to Rice.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. As soon as after that, I went. But I couldn't go after I had decided not to go to Air Force, right? Scholarship commitments and all that are made, so I ended up in Mexico State. But the very next term, I'm at Rice. But I needed to be in New Mexico.
It's almost like the Lord wanted you.
Because that's where, absolutely.
What was it about Steve's approach, or what did he say that sort of satisfied some of your...
I remember a couple of things very vividly. When he realized that I wasn't a Christian, didn't know anything about what he was talking about. One of the questions he asked me was if I believed I'd go to heaven when I died. I said, yeah, I believe so. He said, how sure are you? And, I was cocky, 95%.
Who wouldn't want me?
Yeah, basically. And he goes, what if I give you the other 5? And it shook me to my core. I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Is he 95% sure? I'm 100% sure.
Right.
What if I give you the other 5? I remember that just vividly. And another thing that I remember is, so Steve's from Wisconsin originally. And, he's a big Packers fan and a big Lombardi fan.
Yeah.
So he started, I didn't know it at the time, of course, but he started going through 4 spiritual laws. And
right.
he realizes going through this that I don't even have hooks to hang my...
A little too soon.
You know what I mean? I'm not even there. And so he picks up the Bible, and in his best Vince Lombardi impression, he goes, Voddie, this is a Bible. Remember Lombardi? He says, men, this is a football.
Right.
Yeah. We're going back to the basics. And I'll never forget that. And we just started there, We just started with the basics and answering basic questions. And I remember him, coming back almost every day, and we're dealing with those basic questions. And then after a while, he wasn't just answering my questions, but showing me how to go find answers to my questions as well.
There you go.
So I tell people I was being trained in apologetics before I was converted.
Wow. Yeah.
And I remember one day, it was Friday, November 13th, 1987. I was waiting for Steve, and Steve was late. And I realized I didn't have any more questions.
Dang.
I just laid down on the floor in the locker room, and I just prayed something to the effect of, God, that thing you did for Steve that he's been telling me you want to do for me,
yeah,
now it's good.
Dude. That's so amazing because, I mean, you're a D1 athlete. You got probably the whole world is your oyster kind of thing on campus. And you know, you could probably have anything you wanted from a flesh point of view, you know, and there's still some itch that none of that could scratch.
Listen, my first game, I started my first game as a true freshman, and I had 10 catches for 106 yards as a tight end, not a wide receiver.
Dang.
Yeah, as a tight end.
Before they used tight ends like they are.
Yes, yeah. And so it was like, you're exactly right. You know, it's kind of that, you know, the world is your oyster, but you don't have it all.
Yeah.
And I remember that vividly.
Yeah.
You know, and I also remember vividly that while the whole campus was a buzz, because first of all, people were like, what's this guy? This guy's supposed to be at, you know, some school that's competing for a national championship or whatever.
And Rice was not.
And he's here down in New Mexico State, you know.
Right, yeah.
And he's here at New Mexico State. What is he doing here, you know? And then, of course, you know, after the first game, then there's even more buzz, but not with Steve.
Yeah.
That never changed the way that he approached me. It never changed his goal, his mission with me.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that really stood out.
Yeah.
You know, at me. He didn't want anything from me. He had something for me.
Right. Interesting. That's a lesson for us all.
Yeah.
In terms of your worldview and assumptions before that, and like before and after, who were you in terms of how you saw the world and yourself, and then the difference Jesus made to change your perspective?
Yeah. If you had asked me when it all started, so why Rice, West Point, Air Force Academy? I wanted to practice international law. I want to be a lawyer.
I could see that.
That was just a means to an end.
Sure.
If you had asked 17-year-old Voddie, what do you want? 17-year-old Voddie would have said, I want to be the most powerful black man in the world. That's what 17-year-old Voddie would have told you.
Yeah.
And practicing international law was a means to that end.
Wow.
Right. And so that was the way I saw myself. I always got good grades. I was, you know, National Honor Society, and you know, all the accolades, all the everything. Was running my student government in high school and all that. And so that's what I wanted. I figured I'd play football. I figured I'd have some time in the NFL, but ultimately, beyond that, I wanted to go and practice law and maybe get into politics and have some juice, man, have some power.
Right.
And you know, the Lord got a hold of me, and things ended up very differently.
Wow.
I practiced a different kind of international law.
It's funny how God works, man. His sense of humor is unmatched. So that's awesome. Thank you. More recently, a new chapter of your life involved Zambia.
Yep.
Moving your family
Yep.
Across the ocean to start a university in Zambia. And I'm just curious, I know that's a whole nother thing we could talk about for a long time, but I'm curious how that experience shifted or changed your perspective on what's going on in Christianity here in this part of the world, in the West. Like, you know, I think being outside the culture that you were accustomed to and looking at it from afar might give you a different vantage point. What do you see?
It's not like people think. Like most people, I had my complaints about, you know, church in the U.S. and what's going on here, and I see those things. Interestingly enough, though, living outside of the U.S. made me more grateful for what the Lord is doing here.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
This is still the center of the Christian universe. This is still the place where, you know, the overwhelming majority of the theological books are being published, where the majority of the theological training is taking place.
Yeah.
This is still the place with, you know, very significant, healthy churches, unbelievable preachers here who are influencing and impacting the world in amazing ways. And beyond that, this is still a culture that reflects the fact that it was built on a biblical worldview.
Wow.
And because of that, we have, the freest, most prosperous, some of the safest people that the world has ever known. That's still emanating from here. Now, because we're close to it,
yes,
all we see is the warts.
That's right.
But when you get away from it, and when you live in a culture that doesn't have the benefit of it, for me, I began to see how blessed the church in America is.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's not what I expected you to say.
It's not what I expected to find.
Wow.
It's not what I expected to experience. But it absolutely is.
Yeah.
In terms of material wealth.
Sure.
We always talk about materialism and things like that. But, the most generous Christians in the world in terms of the material wealth that's shared around the world, they're right here.
Yeah.
They're right here. It's unbelievable. But because of that, I worry about what further judgment may look like. Because I think we're under judgment now.
Yeah.
I know people say judgment is going to come to America. I think judgment is here. I think when you're murdering thousands of babies every day, I think when you're, castrating children in the name of gender ideology, I think when you have, Obergefell and same-sex marriage and people lauding that, and you're seeing that even in churches, I think that is judgment.
Interesting.
And some of the people that we have, and have had leading us, I think we are seeing judgment. But even in the midst of that, we're seeing churches grow.
Yeah.
We're seeing, ministers of the gospel who are standing firm and standing tall, and it's just encouraging. So, in all of that, I just wonder what further judgment could look like.
Interesting.
If we don't heed the
warnings. Yeah, it's like, it's not what I expect you to say about being overseas and looking back at the West and the church, but it doesn't take any urgency away. What you shared actually heightens the urgency to cherish and protect what we have.
Yes.
And not let any sort of infiltration from the world or the darkness of culture, further penetrate the church and take away this precious gift.
The Protestant Reformation was largely European.
Yeah.
And so think about the golden age that they experienced in continental Europe and then in the United Kingdom, and look at where they are today.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
And that's what we don't want to see.
Right.
We lived in England, for a while, and it was almost depressing trying to find a church.
Yeah. Interesting.
And today, there's no free speech in the United Kingdom.
Right.
People are being arrested for their tweets. People are going to jail because of tweets.
Yeah.
And not bad ones.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And so
wild.
Yeah, it's really wild.
And that goes away when the sort of Christ-centered foundational assumptions go away. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when you look at the state of the church in America specifically, you've been one of the forerunners in terms of calling out some of the potential threats and real threats going on and infiltrating the church and churches. And I think I first came across your work through Fault Lines, your book in 2021. I just found it in the aftermath or tail end of COVID when, we had a lot more than COVID going on. We had, BLM and a lot of conversations around CRT, critical race theory and everything. And I stumbled upon your work, and I just dove in, headlong into your online work there. But you've been identifying some of these threats. I guess we could sum them up as wokeism. I think I'm tired
wokeism, cultural Marxism.
Yeah, I'm a little tired of that term, wokeism. I think it's overplayed, but I don't know what else to call it. How big of a threat is that sort of mind virus to the church?
It's a huge threat, and the first time that I really addressed the kind of foundational aspect of it was in my first book in 2004. And then in 2007, when Barack Obama was running for president, I was blogging back then. Back when people blogged.
Yeah, those were the days.
I wrote a number of pieces about his Marxist roots and those connections and where all that ideology and worldview would lead. And when he was elected, I wrote a piece basically warning that that we would have huge problems on the horizon, particularly in the areas of race.
Yeah.
Because of the ideology and worldview, and it's all because of this sort of Gramscian neo-Marxist oppressor-oppressed paradigm, worldview that has been making its long march through the institutions since the late 1960s. So it's not new.
Yeah.
It didn't come from nowhere. It's been here for a long time. Even the term woke. The term woke, that's a 1960s term, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you better get woke. And so, yeah, it's, just like it, didn't just materialize out of nowhere, it's been there. It's been in institutions of higher learning, particularly in schools of education.
Yeah.
That's where the radicals went in the 60s, right? After they stopped bombing buildings, they decided, whoa, wait, there's another way we can do this.
Yeah.
And so schools of education,
especially
schools of
seminaries,
journalism, and political science, and then all of the things that came out of the political science.
Yeah.
So when you look at feminist studies, queer studies, all of these other sort of studies.
Sure.
These all come out of, that stuff. So they were there. And there are a couple of flashpoints that really sort of, brought about this sea change. And now it seems like the pendulum is swinging in the other direction.
Yeah.
And I'm telling people, be happy, but recognize that those people are still there.
Right.
Right?
They're not changing their minds.
They're not changing their minds.
Yeah.
They may have a tactical retreat for now, but there's still, there's still more administrators than there are students at Harvard.
Sure. Are there really?
So, and these people are all, rooted and grounded in this ideology that gave us wokeness, So,
which is fundamentally Marxist.
Yes.
That's what I've heard you say a lot.
Yes.
I'm not sure to the extent that argument is being accepted by those who hear it. I don't think the world sees the connections between what we call the social justice movement or wokeism or whatever and the roots of it being Marxist.
Yeah.
But that's something you've clearly seen and articulated.
Yeah, and many others, and many others. But we'll see.
Yeah. That was one of the questions I wanted to ask you is given the last 3 weeks have been wild, bro, in the U.S. So it's been 3 weeks, I think, since Trump took office. And I feel like the Christians I talk to are sort of in a hesitant state of mind. Like they want to rejoice and celebrate.
Yeah.
But either because, they don't want to be seen spiking the football and being mean, or they don't fully trust what's going on and who's at the helm or whatever. They're just sort of hesitant.
Or they were anti-Trump.
Yes.
And now they're looking at the things that he's doing, like standing up for kids not being mutilated, standing up for,
women's sports,
standing up for pro-lifers who have been persecuted under the last administration. They're seeing all these things that are happening that a lot of Christians were saying, this is why it's him and not her. And they're kind of being hesitant because they don't want to say, oh, that was a good choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they whatever. Yeah, whatever.
You feel, though, at some level that Christians should feel some relief or excitement in this particular moment?
Yes. It is the kindness of God when the stuff that we were seeing, children were being given puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones. Children were being surgically mutilated.
Yeah.
In the name of an ideology, And if you've ever listened to the testimony of a detransitioner, it's gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
You know?
We've had at least one on the Maybe God podcast.
Yeah.
Chloe Cole.
Yeah. And then, the adversary is always calling light darkness and darkness light, and good evil and evil good. You know, in the NIH's own research, there's a piece that I keep on my phone to show people. You know, people who underwent these treatments were 12 times more likely to be suicidal than those who didn't.
Yeah.
And what were we told? They need to do it so they won't be suicidal.
Yeah. You can have a dead son or a live daughter, whatever.
And so, I don't think there's anything wrong with celebrating, these things that are happening. Nor do I think that we have to not celebrate just in case there are things that are coming that we won't agree with. Of course, there are things that are coming that we won't agree with, right?
Yeah.
And that leads me to another thing. There's this mindset that in order for you to befriend someone or promote someone in any way, you have to sign off on everything they say or do, which is just, it's absolutely ridiculous. You know, you don't have to do that.
Sure.
We can say, man, that's great, that's great, that's great. Nope, that's bad. Stop that. You know, that's great. I mean, we could do that, but instead people are just kind of, sitting back and, twiddling their thumbs and, and I say, no, don't, there's no time for that.
You think there's any risk to the Christian witness if we're seen as sort of rallying behind a man the world has decided is Satan incarnate, even though the world doesn't believe in Satan? And to be fair, a man whose track record doesn't exactly scream Jesus in the past, right? I don't know where he's at today, and I don't mean to suggest that I know where his heart's at, but
so there is no alternative, right? Every man that we end up having to, rally behind, live under. And when I say rally behind and live under, I mean, this person is the president.
Yeah.
He's our president. And so we rally behind, we live under, our president. We respect the office, and we hope that this person, whether he's our guy or the other guy, somewhere that got lost.
Oh, man.
Somewhere that got lost, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, hey, that's not the guy that I wanted, but he's our president, and I hope he does well. I hope he, I want him to succeed,
Yeah. That's not the case anymore, is
That's
it?
not the case anymore, And, but it's also so ironic because some of those same people who were worried about him and his past because of his moral past, right? They were not concerned at all and didn't want to talk about Kamala Harris's moral past.
That didn't even come up.
Didn't even come up.
You had to dig to find it.
Even though you didn't really.
Yeah.
Right?
You had to be intentional.
But I mean, as far as Christians who are just so, no, because this guy, they weren't saying to people on the left, do you know who she is morally?
Yeah. Interesting.
They weren't saying that. They were only saying that to people on the right. And there's this thing that I have, we poke left and punch right. Right?
Yeah.
And we do it because we're so afraid of people.
Yeah.
We do it because we want people to think that we're kind and want people to think that we're gentle. We do it because we've been deceived into believing that people don't really hate the gospel and they don't really hate Jesus. They just don't like how we present it.
Yeah.
Well, read your Bible.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
They hate the gospel. They hate Jesus. They'll tell you that it's how you present it. And then when you switch how you present it, they won't like that either. And ultimately, they'll push you all the way back into the corner where they say, no, what we really want is for there to be no gospel.
Yeah. For you to be like us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I don't have time for that. I don't have time for worrying about that. And, if I'm happy about, this, that, or the other, worrying about how people are going to, identify it. And,
well, I got some bad news for you, Voddie.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard, but if you support Trump, you ain't black.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah, I think the last guy said that.
That changed the way you feel about yourself?
Yeah. No.
I can't believe I brought that up.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think the bigger sort of topic or angle on this is Christians who are faithful to the gospel have to grow thicker skin.
Yes.
And that's something I've seen from you that is a witness to me. You're not that much older than me, but I want to be you when I grow up, in this sense that you are not bound by or constrained by concerns of others' feelings towards you. And yet I've heard you say it still gets to you sometimes. But you don't want to be the guy everybody loves to hate. But man, your comment sections can be interesting places sometimes.
Yeah, I stay out of them.
It's probably for the best.
Yeah, I stay out of them because of the potential influence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You spend a lot of time in the comment section, and now all of a sudden you're trying to shave off the edges of what you say because of people who say this or that, and that the only comment section that matters to me is the people who know and love me, right?
Yeah.
My wife, my church, those people who spiritually are in my life, and there are people in my life, who will say to me, "Hey, maybe not that," and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, because they have your best interest.
Yeah. But comment section, no.
Yeah, bro.
No,
there's nothing good there.
No. On both sides,
sure,
right? Because the great
accolades
as well, the accolades as well.
Yeah,
those are addicting.
That's right.
And so, I don't. Yeah, try not to.
Yeah, it can be deceptive.
Yeah,
for sure. What do you think people who do get upset when they hear you talk about women and men, or LGBT, or BLM? Name your acronym.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think they hear you saying that you're not really saying?
That's a good one. I don't know that that's the issue. I don't know that people hear me saying the wrong things or hear me saying something that I'm not saying. I think what we've done is we've created caricatures, right? And we have a caricature of the person who is anti-BLM, right? And the person who's anti-BLM is the white supremacist, the white nationalist, the racist, the this, that, and the other. That's the person. And so if somebody says anything against BLM, we already know who you are, right?
Yeah.
So we don't have to listen to what you say.
Sure.
And a lot of people, mistakenly thought that, well, because you're black, they won't try that with you because you're black. Well, yes, they absolutely will.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Yeah, they absolutely will because the problem is not the problem, right?
Yeah,
and
bro. Well, one of the things you would hear from that side, the secular, humanist, Marxist side, or whatever, is that only white people can really be racist.
Yeah.
Unless they decide you are.
Yes.
In which case they'll break their own rule. And I saw that with my wife, who is a woman of color.
Yeah.
She's Hispanic. And this was when I was still a progressive, not yet a Christian, but pretending to be a pastor. And she was a pastor too at the time in the Methodist Church. And but she was always faithful. Like, she never had these wild ideas that I used to be under the illusion and deception of. And I don't know anybody that loves the Lord like she does. But so they would invite her to conferences and committees because she was a voice that needs to be heard.
Yes.
A strong Latina woman who helps us feel better about ourselves for having her at the table.
Yes.
Until she opened her mouth.
Yes. Yes.
At which point she was no longer a voice that needed to be heard because they didn't like the things she was saying.
Yes.
About things as simple as salvation through Christ alone.
Yes.
Or, the Bible's totally true.
So what do you call that when you want to listen to someone because of their race or ethnicity, because of what you already think you know about them because of their race or ethnicity. And then when they're not the stereotype of their race or ethnicity, you disqualify them.
Selective tokenism?
Racism.
Racism.
It's racism, man. You know? Black people are this.
That's right.
Come, black person, affirm that. No, I don't agree. You're not black. Next black person. Right. That's racist, man.
That's what I saw in my own progressive circles in the months leading up to my conversion. I think the Lord was preparing me for what he was about to do in my life in the Holy Land when he finally got a hold of me. But I first had to have my old worldview broken down because I was so proud of my progressivism. And I thought progressives were the good people and all of that. And then what I saw was things like with my wife, but also just what I later came to call the soft bigotry of low expectations. Where
W.
That's
W's
line, that's right. And I attributed that to him in one of my books because I had to figure out where that came from. It came from W. Maybe a speechwriter. But maybe W. But that statement is so true. That's exactly what it is. And we'll appreciate you and have you as a voice that needs to be heard at our table as long as you don't get out of line. At which point we'll invite you out. Because it's not really about diversity.
No.
It's really about uniformity. That looks diverse, but only in the way it looks.
Superficial diversity.
Diversity. And there were all sorts of things like that where, black people they don't know how to get IDs. We can't have voter ID because black people don't know, they don't have the internet.
Yes, man.
And I just started hearing this stuff from my white progressive friends, and over time I realized there was a lot lacking.
I loved Ami Horowitz's video on that. Ami Horowitz, the Jewish filmmaker, and he went to Harlem. And first he asked some people somewhere else, about voter ID and black people and this, that, and the other, and there's these young people who were saying all those things. It's just harder for them to get IDs, and they don't. So he's in Harlem, and he's like, "Hey, do you have an ID?" Asking black people. I got an ID. Really? You know how to get an ID? Of course I know how to get an ID. You can find a DMV? Yeah, I can find a DMV. It's right around there on 125th Street. Okay. You got a computer? Yeah, I got a computer. You got the internet? Yeah, I've got, And it's just, and then he would say, people say that black people can't do, and people would be like, man, that's racist.
Right.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
It really is.
And then we ask for IDs to get into the DNC. Right?
The hypocrisy.
You had to have your ID to get into the DNC.
It was interesting in your message this morning at the Story Church. You talked briefly about immigration and your experience as an immigrant, having immigrated to Zambia and living as an immigrant, having to have all your documents in order, and then hearing about or coming back to the States.
Every 2 years, man. We had to go deal with that every 2 years.
And we have this, of course, massive immigration debate happening, and the deportations and sort of a return to law and order. And there are soft-hearted progressives who are saying that it's hateful and all of this.
And bigoted. And
which, the Bible's clear, we got to love immigrants and strangers, right? But that doesn't mean at the expense of law and order. I think that's something we have to hold in tension. But anyway, I just think this is all very interesting. I do think recently I've spoken with Christians overseas who are facing persecution. And one of them said, you American Christians just keep talking about these culture war things, and you're fighting tooth and nail over 2 bathrooms or 3. And we're dying. Do you get a sense ever that maybe we hyper-focus on these issues?
Because it's all we have. Right? It's all we have to focus on. And I don't think it's wrong to focus on those things when it's what we have.
Sure.
Because if we don't focus on the small things, they become big things.
That's right.
And so I hear where people are coming from, and I agree wholeheartedly. The things that we call persecution and the things that we don't get it. And we need to get it. But at the same time, we need to fight the battles that are ours to fight. Right? We need to fight the things that come up, right?
It doesn't have to be either or.
You fight the small fire so that it doesn't become a wildfire.
That's a good word. So your most recent book is, as if you weren't catching enough heat already, It's Not Like Being Black.
Yes.
Tell us about that book and why you wrote it.
Yeah, but you got to read the subtitle, man.
I know it's something about how being gay is not the same. I've read the book, but I just can't remember the subtitle.
Yeah. How sexual activists hijacked the civil rights movement.
Yes.
So no, that's actually a message that I've been doing. It's a kind of a lecture that I did, a sermon that I preached, and a seminar. Developed into all of those things. And basically what I'm doing there is I'm tracing this movement toward identifying homosexuals, the whole LGBTQIA plus whatever, as sexual minorities, and why people do that and how that worked. And really, it goes back to the same kind of
critical theory,
and neo-Marxist ideology. I mean, you wonder, because you got L's and the G's, lesbians and gays. Anybody who knows anything about those movements knows historically they do not get along. All right, but at least you can put them under homosexuality.
Yeah.
And then the B's, the bisexuals. The bisexuals kind of belie the argument that the L's and G's are making, but that's okay. You put the B's in there.
Sure.
And then you got the T's. Well, the L's and the G's have been saying forever, it's how we're created. It's a hardware issue, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to find
I was born this way.
Yeah, they're trying to find pheromones. They're trying to find genes.
Sure.
They're trying to find, brain. So they're trying to do this stuff to prove that it's the hardware.
Right.
And then the T's come along and say the hardware means nothing,
Yeah.
And so ideologically, they're complete contradiction.
Yeah.
But they're all part of the same alphabet soup. Right, and in the eyes, people who are intersex. That's a legitimate
biological
endocrinological.
Yeah.
That's a condition, and they're like, why are y'all pulling us into this? And then so the question comes: how do you put all this stuff together, and why do you keep smashing all this stuff together? Well, in the neo-Marxist ideology, if you've ever seen one of these oppression wheels, you have at the center. The oppressive idea, and on the outside, the ones who are oppressed or whatever. And at the end of the day, whether it's, your sexuality, your this whatever, the oppressor is white, male, heterosexual, cisgendered, able-bodied, native-born, so on and so forth, and eventually get Christian.
Right.
At the end of the day, the worldview of the oppressor, the worldview that creates the oppression, is the Christian worldview.
Yeah.
Okay. It's the white Christian West that creates the oppressive worldview. So what unites all of these people in the alphabet, even though they're ideological contradictions of one another, is that they are a rejection of the Christian worldview as it relates to sex and sexuality. Therefore, they are sexual minorities, just like other people are racial minorities.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you understand that all of this kind of is an outworking of the same, neo-Marxist oppressor-oppressed paradigm,
right?
It really brings everything into sharp relief.
So you're saying it was on some level intentional to sort of equalize the standing of LGBTQ plus people with racial minority groups.
Absolutely.
So that they could be lumped in with or have their own version of the civil rights.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, we should think of that in a very different category than racial identity.
Yeah, yeah.
But tell me why, from a Christian perspective, why that is the case.
So when you talk about a person's ethnicity, you're talking about an immutable characteristic. And you're talking about something that God absolutely makes for his glory to demonstrate his grandeur in his creation. When you talk about people who are expressing sexual deviance, you're talking about people who take something that God made for his glory and are actually dismantling it and undermining it and destroying it. And the evidence of that, of course, is that it bears no fruit, right? That's
It's hard to argue with that.
yeah. It bears no fruit. It's impossible, for it to bear fruit. And not to mention the fact that in Scripture it's clearly outlined as sinful and deviant and a bunch of other things. And so when you do that, the only way that you can conflate these things is if you're arguing for a world where the God who created the world and everything in it doesn't exist. If you're arguing for a world where the people who believe in that, are the evil purveyors of a worldview that exists just to oppress outsiders, that's the only way that you get there. So for us as Christians, we submit to the God who made the world and everything in it. We argue that there is but one race, right? Maybe two, the race of the first Adam and the race of the last. And that there are, only two sexes, and that marriage is between a man and a woman, not because of what we prefer, but because of created order, right? And that's the main difference. One of us is arguing from something outside of ourselves that is bigger than ourselves, that we're submitting to. The other is arguing from something purely subjective and inward that we're calling others to submit to us.
Wow. That's well put. It's almost like you just wrote a book about this. I can't believe you found somebody that would publish a book.
Yeah, well, After Fault Lines.
Controversial. Right.
After Fault Lines, I figured I'd take my shot now. That one did well. Let me take my shot now.
Yeah.
But what was really hard is getting people to carry it.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. To sell it.
Yeah.
It just reminds me of the story you told in the message today about reaching and grabbing your wife.
Yeah.
And for those that, most of you probably were not in the Story Church congregation this morning, but you told a story about, hypothetically, sort of a story about somebody seeing you mistreating or abusing your wife in public because they saw you reach out and grab her by the arm and yank her back, and she screamed. And then they came in the story, they come to Bridget, your wife, and say, I saw what happened. Is everything okay? I saw what Voddie did. And she explains that. You can take it from here.
That I was yanking her out of the street because the car was about to run her over.
A car she didn't see coming.
Yes,
she was looking the wrong way.
Absolutely.
And you were pulling her out of the way from an oncoming car. And I think that's, and the other thing that the person who witnessed the abuse didn't see was her embracing you and giving you the biggest kiss of your life.
Biggest kiss of our 35-year marriage.
That was part of your fantasy.
Yes.
But it's a great illustration because I think the world hears Christians who, admittedly, we don't always get it right? Yeah. Sometimes we do come across in an un-Christ-like way.
Yeah.
Okay, I give you that. But the world also doesn't want to hear, oftentimes, what Christians have to say, no matter how we say it. And what they interpret is hate, oppression, restriction.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is love.
Yeah.
It's just not touchy-feely, emotional, sentimental love. It's sometimes, let me grab you before you get hit by this oncoming car kind of love.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I'm sorry.
No, go.
But you just made me you think about this. What people are not being honest about is that those lifestyles, they're not lifestyles, they're death styles. The levels of alcoholism, drug abuse, suicide, domestic violence within those types of relationships, the greatest levels of domestic violence in relationships in our culture, they're not male-female. They're female-female. Domestic violence is off the chain for lesbian relationships, right? And so, the average lifespan of gay men is some, 10 to 20 years shorter than the average lifespan of a heterosexual man. The movies and television programs, present this in this, wonderful, happy, rose-colored way, but it's not so.
Yeah.
People who are going through these transitions, their lives are a wreck, not just emotionally and spiritually, but also medically.
Wow.
They become perpetual, patients, for the rest of their lives,
Yeah.
because of the stuff that they're trying to do. So I think we need to get rid of that myth too, because the myth is that there are these people who are out there just experiencing their best lives. They're the happiest people in the world because they're finally being true to who they are, quote unquote.
Following their hearts.
They're finally following their hearts. And then here we come while the birds are singing, right? And the sun is shining, and we're just ripping them out of this, perfect reality, when the truth is actually very different.
Right.
These are dark lifestyles.
Yeah, and speaking the truth in a way that is in any way compelling it's a tough thing. So if you're a Christian and you're watching and you're like, I don't want to stick my neck out there like Voddie's doing, I think we both get that, but man, let the Lord guide you and just show you how to speak the truth in love, but speak the truth nonetheless, and just no longer going along with the winds of change in the culture. That's always the easy thing to do. A couple of last questions. Like, if there's somebody watching right now and are a faithful follower of Jesus in this culture, given everything we know about this culture, just give us a word for them. What would you say to the average believer out there that's wanting to take the next step of faithfulness and be a witness to the world?
I think you need to be honest and faithful in terms of who you are and what you have. I always talk about Moses theology. What I mean by that is, when he comes to the Red Sea and the waters have to part, God could have done or used anything.
Yeah.
But he asked them, what's that in your hand? And that's what he used.
Right.
Right? I mean, he's a shepherd, and there's a shepherd's staff, and this is what he carries. So that's what he used. And so I think we need to be asking ourselves, what do I have in my hand?
Yeah.
Because that's what the Lord uses. I think the problem comes when we look at other people, right? And we look at what they have, and we think, oh, that person is doing it. That's the way it's supposed to be done. I don't have that, therefore I can't do it.
Yeah.
And I think we need to just be looking at what we have in our hands and be faithful.
Right.
And be good stewards of what we have in our hands. Do you have a relationship with somebody? Use that relationship. Do you have, a writing ministry? Use a writing ministry. Do you have, whatever? What is it that the Lord has given you?
Sure.
Be faithful with that.
Yeah.
Use that to God's glory.
Yeah.
And don't get mired in trying to figure out how to do it like somebody else.
Yeah. You know what he's put in most of our hands are these things.
Yeah.
And these things, believe it or not, can be used for God's glory. But
really?
It takes some work, man. Take some discipline. You got to watch what you're following and watch what you're saying with it. But And what about to somebody, and I know we have people that are still watching who are not on Team Jesus yet and have more doubts than answers about him, and just for whatever reason, y'all don't feel like Christians like me and Voddie are for you. And yet we are, as much as God was for us when we were lost, and by his grace, he found us. What would you say to them about Jesus and his gospel?
A couple of things. Number one, there is no other hope. Every other religion in the world basically says you need to have a religious experience and then do more good things than bad things and hope for the best when you die. And there's so many problems with that. Problem one, you can't be good. You know that, I know that. You can't be good. And then if you do believe that you can be good, you're proud, and that's not good. So
round and round we go.
Yeah. And the other thing is, what do you do with all that stuff you did before your religious experience? Nobody has an answer. We do. Christ died for sin once for all, the just for the unjust, in order that he might bring us to God. You have to deal with the fact that there is a God who created the world, and that we must deal with him.
Yeah.
You have to deal with the fact that that there's sin in your life.
Yeah.
And you know that this God who exists has to be a just God, right? A lot of people are mad at God because something happened that they feel like is not just, which means that they know that God is supposed to be just, right?
Yeah.
Well, if God is supposed to be just, you're in trouble, right?
Yeah.
And all we're telling you is that there's one answer, and we found that answer. And what kind of people would we be if we found that answer and didn't share it? What wretched creatures,
hateful,
would we be to have found that answer,
bro,
and then decided not to share it? So whatever it is that you're thinking or dealing with or wrestling with, just keep that in mind, you know?
Yeah. Amen. Well, Voddie, this has been amazing. Thank you for spending so much time with us today. And there's more I wanted to get into, but I'm just grateful and slightly amazed that you came to my church and shared a word with us, and just following you all these years online. It's a surreal day. And
it's been my pleasure,
bro,
I assure you.
Thank you. As much as I've respected, looked up to you and your courage, and like there's other things we could have talked about that we don't necessarily line up on some non-essential, you know. I think your team, maybe Team Calvin and I'm Team Wesley or whatever, Reformed and not or whatever. But we baptized the babies
but
here.
You just signed off on everything that I believe, though, right? Because isn't that what we do today, right?
Yeah.
You can't sit down with somebody unless you sign off on everything that, you know. And I'm calling you sign off on mine.
Yeah, amen. That's why you're here.
That's no, but isn't that good though, brother?
I hope it is.
Because
I believe
it. We have to recognize that, like you said, there are those secondary and tertiary issues that we disagree on, but we sit here and we've spent all this time, right, as brothers, and that hadn't even been a part of it,
right?
And there's so much more that we have, right? And you know, not that any of us thinks that those things are completely unimportant or that you don't have those discussions, but there's so much more that we can get done if we do it.
And we can't emulate the world, and like they did to my wife, you know, when they decided that she was no longer a voice that needs to be heard because she didn't fit their limited whatever, you know. I baptize babies and you don't, and we'll work it out in heaven one day. See who's right.
Yeah, man.
Among other things. But Lord, I just am grateful that we have Jesus in common.
Amen.
That's all we need. So if you want to know more about Voddie, you can find more links in the show notes today and pick up his latest book. Man, I wish I'd written down the subtitle when you told me. It's not the same as being black. Is that right?
It's not like being black.
It's not like being black. Then subtitle. What is it?
How sexual activists hijacked the civil rights movement.
How sexual activists hijacked the civil rights movement. Buy it on Amazon while you still can before they remove it. Or wherever.
I don't think they found it yet. I don't think they noticed it yet.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Baucham, for being with us. And
it's my pleasure, brother.
Been such a blessing.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you all for watching.